Hello family, this is African Esquire here with a new video. So the French president recently has given a speech calling for there to be a European army. So I'm going to let you listen to a part of the speech where he's basically saying why Europe needs its own army and Europe cannot depend on the United States. And after you hear what he says, I'll come back and say why this is so obvious that it would be France the one that would be making this request, but also what type of implications does this possibly have for African people.
French President Emmanuel Macron has reiterated his belief that Europe needs its own army, citing one perceived threat as the main reason.
On ne protégera pas les Européens si on ne décide pas d'avoir une vraie armée européenne. Face à la Russie qui est à nos frontières et qui a montré qu'elle pouvait être menaçante, moi je veux construire un vrai dialogue de sécurité avec la Russie, qui est un pays que je respecte, qui est européen.
Une armée
Mais
européenne.
on doit avoir une Europe qui se défend davantage seule et sans dépendre seulement des États-Unis et de manière plus souveraine.
So why is this? Why are we talking about him again, basically? I mean, we already talked about the French president previously. We've talked about him numerous times. I mean, last week, I believe it was him talking about African women fertility. This week, it's him talking about the need for a European army. But I think that it's not so much him that we're focused on, because really he's just a president of a country in Europe that's actually not that powerful. It's the sentiment that he's willing to actually say, the things that he's actually willing to address that most European countries leaders would not just say out loud. So he's saying out loud that Europe needs its own army. Why is it significant that it's France saying this and not Britain or not Germany or those other European countries? Well, one, I think it's significant because France is really one of the weakest European countries if you look at how unstable their economy is. They really depend on maintaining neo-colonial control over the African countries that were formerly colonized by France. The second that the Francophone countries start saying, no, we're no longer going to pay France a colonial debt, and yes, they do to this day pay a debt to France. The second that they say, no, we no longer want to use CFA francs as our currency, we want to use our own currency. The second that they say, no, we're not going to allow France to dictate how we do our military operations or how we actually train our military when we actually get into military conflicts. The second that they start rebelling against these terms that were written out whenever colonialism was supposed to have been eradicated in France, but actually it only continued. The second that they start questioning the terms of these agreements, that's going to completely dishevel France, because France has been surviving tooth and nail on the idea that Africa was going to continue funding them, continue being exploitable by them. And Nicolas Sarkozy even said explicitly that if it wasn't for Africa, that France would basically be plunged into the dark ages, because France really doesn't have a strong economy outside of colonialism. They didn't adapt, I guess, as much as other countries did towards neo-colonialism. They still need explicit colonialism. So that's one reason why it's really interesting, because France, again, is very weak in their economy and they're weak in their actual prospects, and they actually need to have some type of military force to maintain their control over African people. The other thing is that France is really the last European country to engage in an assault on an African country as far as the terms of war. So as we all know, during when Gaddafi was still in power, France basically went and declared war on the Gaddafi, saying that, okay, well, he's an evil dictator, he does horrible things to people, therefore we have to get him out of power. Well, years later, we know that that's actually not the reason why France declared war on Gaddafi or said that Gaddafi has to go. The real reason is because Gaddafi was pushing to get Africa to have a united currency, and that currency was going to be on a gold standard. Now, had a currency in Africa been on a gold standard, meaning that currency backed by gold, that would have completely changed the power dynamics between European countries and African countries. Because as we know, Africa is the most minerally rich continent. It has the most gold of any other continent. Europe does not have the most gold. It has a lot less gold than Africa. So if the currency is backed by gold and Africa has all the gold, that's going to completely mess up Europe as far as maintaining their position of power. That we know from different government documents and emails being leaked was the actual reason why France wanted to go in and completely undo the Gaddafi regime, and that's why they ultimately did it. The interesting thing is, as Macron is saying in this video, we can't rely on the United States when it comes to our military ventures. Well, until the United States got involved with Libya, France really wasn't gaining much traction. They actually needed the United States or someone else to jump into their aid in order to have any force as far as the military intervention in Libya. So this is very telling, I think, that the last country to have actually engaged in a war in an African country, or really any other country, the last European country, that same country is now saying we need an independent army, or we need a European army, because we don't want to depend on the United States, or we don't want to depend on so-and-so or this person in order to actually engage inside of combat. And it's very telling, because that tells you that, to me, what it tells me is that France sees that they're going to, in a future day, need their own army, and that the United States might not necessarily agree with what they want them to do. And they want it to be that Europe has an army that's fighting for European interests, aside from the interests of the collective. They want to fight for European interests and ultimately maintain European dominance. So don't believe all this crap about that we were scared for Russia being on our borders. You haven't heard anything going back and forth between France and Russia. I mean, if anything, it's mostly Donald Trump and Putin who start up these beef conversations. But that's just a ploy, and just understand that's really a cover-up. The same way that France tried to cover up their motives to go into Libya, saying that Gaddafi was committing human rights abuses. Like, we don't know that France funds regimes to this very day, such as the regime in Togo, Cameroon, all throughout Francophone Africa. And these regimes are horrible with their human rights records. Their people are suffering far worse than any of the people suffering in Libya. In fact, under Gaddafi, the people who are living, I believe it was one of the best living standards in Africa at the time. But when you compare the human rights records of people like Paul Biya and of the guy in Togo, and Gasingbe, all of these people who are doing horrible things to African people that far outweigh anything that was ever done in Libya, and they have the nerve to say that, oh, the Gaddafi must go. That's because it's basically used to cover up their true intentions. So I'm saying that to say, when he says we need a European army, understand that his true intention is not to actually say that we're actually scared of Russia. His true intention is to say that we need an army that's going to fight for our interests, the white supremacist interests of the European, in order to ensure that we have dominance over African people. Because that's all white supremacy is. It's ensuring European dominance over African people. So that's all I have for you guys today. I'd love to know what you think about the French president, once again, opening his mouth and telling us what he really thinks and what he really feels. So I'll see you all in another video.